Okay, thanks very much for having me. I've got the dreaded after lunch slot, so I will try and keep my comments brief, to the point, and maybe even light and entertaining at times. I bring you greetings from the rest of Canada. I actually live in Montreal, but the organization I work for, NCASI, is actually across the country and into the US as well. And we work with the forest products industry to just do science. We don't do any of that advocacy stuff or anything like that. We just do science. So one of the projects that we've done over the last year was we put together an inventory of all the caribou research that's going on currently in Canada. We thought that would be useful for managers as a resource. If they're looking for people to ask questions to, they would look through this list of projects and they would know who to talk to. So this we'll start a little bit light. I wanted to sort of set the context here a little bit with some relatively thoughtful quotes on caribou research. Now, I'm not so sure that Einstein ever actually did any caribou work, but he's famously quoted as saying, "The important thing is not to stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existing." Okay, so we'll start with the idea that it's important to keep questioning, but at the same time we have to balance that with folks like Edward Hodnett, who said, if you do not ask the right questions, you do not get the right answers. I think that's also an important concept to finding the solutions, filling the information gaps that are missing. And finally, that great philosopher, Larry the Cable Guy, who said, "Get her done." We have some very serious issues in Canada. We have caribou declines occurring across the country, especially at the southern edge of the boreal. And if we want to really put a fine point in it, and I apologize to those Albertans, might be considered a little bit more severe here in Alberta. I'm not pointing any fingers, I'm just saying. So when we keep that in mind, that we do have some serious issues and we do need to find solutions, preferably sooner rather than later, we know there is a long list of published works on caribou. There's been over 120 years. That's just a quick Google search for publications on caribou. You find they go back more than 120 years. And caribou decline has been ongoing for a very long time. And obviously a lot of folks have put a lot of effort into trying to figure out what's causing it. It's very much a multifaceted problem. I think that's reflected in a lot of the talks that we've heard from government folks who've talked about using multiple tools in the toolbox to get at different problems. Pressures, the significant drivers of change have changed over time. I think initial development and settlement was obviously the start, and perhaps over-harvesting, and then you get into changing landscapes, altered predator-prey dynamics, which has been extensively discussed today, new disturbance types in the landscape, new landscape changes, and changes to natural cycles, be that predator-prey cycles or climate change. And as has also been mentioned, many practices have been developed to minimize and mitigate these effects. But unfortunately, they've been not effective. Declines continue in most places. So the results of this huge volume of literature has been summarized by many people in many different places. My organization has written 2 or 3 reports on caribou, trying to sort of grasp the whole bucket of research. So this has been going on for quite some time. So what research is currently going on today? We put together this inventory of caribou research programs in Canada. Elston alluded to the Canadian Boreal Forest Agreement. This project was partially financially supported by the CBFA. This is one of the tasks that the Science Committee felt needed to get done, so they partnered with us to do this. The goal, as I said, was simply to document all research currently underway, not yet published in Canada across all ecotypes. And I need to point out this likely failed. It's very difficult to capture every single project going on, and some may have been initiated just after we finished a survey. Someone might have gotten on the ground and started doing a project. So I'm absolutely certain that I've missed some, or that we've missed some in this effort. So if I missed your project, or you haven't heard anything about this and you're mad, please don't throw anything. Now, the purpose of this report is to gain a better understanding of what questions are currently being asked in the context of our current understanding. What do we currently know? What don't we know? And what questions are being asked? And to, as I said, to provide a source of research programs and expertise for managers to call on. Methods. This was actually a follow-up to a report we did similarly in 2007. In that report, we documented about 51 projects. That was far short of how many there were even then. But we did a decent effort to try, so we decided to start with that. we contacted all the people who had done projects in that report to see if they were still doing projects, what's going on, what are you doing, and in total we ended up contacting over 100 folks from across Canada. That's within industry, government, academia. Again, all provincial and federal governments contacted, all major universities contacted, and we asked them to provide the following information: a title for the project, a list of the PIs on the project, affiliated organizations, including funders if they were comfortable sharing that information, study region in question, the anticipated date of completion, and an abstract for the project. I should point out that I can get you a copy of this report. All you have to do is slip me a business card stapled to a 20, and I can get you a copy of this report, no problem. I'm kidding about the 20. 10's fine. And then we followed up this little survey information with, okay, so if you have got this project, can you identify anyone else in your area, in your jurisdiction, that might be doing a project? And we sort of used a snowball effect to try and capture as many projects as we possibly could. Now, if you compare this to the 2007 report, acknowledging the 2007 report was probably not terribly complete, there was an increase in projects. In particular, Quebec and Newfoundland and Labrador both increased the number of projects they were doing. Again, I don't know if this is because more people knew who we were and were willing to send their information or engage with it, or we actually did find increased effort. I would probably say that in Quebec in particular, this is a result of increased effort, because I know the Quebec system a little bit better. So you can see that in various jurisdictions, the number of projects on the ground have changed, but in total there's a significant bump up in the number of projects that we found. We categorize the projects and we group them in very general terms into three major categories. We did this based on keywords that we pulled either from the abstract or that the authors themselves provided to us, and we grouped them into the 7 categories you see here: basic ecology, disturbance-driven, that's dealing with natural or anthropogenic disturbance and linear features, energetics and nutrition, so forage available, forage value, physiological response, and so on. Genetics, DNA barcoding, genetic variability. Predation-driven, you've heard a lot of talk about predator work. And then finally administrative, so that's your TEK, industrial collaboration, cumulative effects projects, where maybe industries are working together or something like that. So that's how we group the projects generally. Now again, there was a comment made by Elston that perhaps we don't need to do so much basic ecology. Based on our categorization, you can see that basic ecology has actually increased just slightly as a percentage. So folks are still not shying away from doing basic ecology research. Disturbance driven, again, that's probably a little bit more practical, a little bit more getting to the problem at hand, as well as the predation driven stuff. You can see in 2007, out of 51 projects, there was 1 project that was working on energetics and nutrition. There's now 3% out of about, I believe, 84 projects or so. So that's probably 2 projects now that are working on energetic nutrition. It's still not a big one. One of them is ours, which I will talk about a little bit at the end. So you can see that things have not changed a whole lot in the intervening years. You can see that these different categories have changed a little bit in the last little while. There's actually a little bit more basic ecology work going on, a little bit more disturbance stuff. Predation-driven research, though, is still a significant portion. It's actually dropped a little bit in actual percentage of projects that include predation work. Energetics and nutrition, slight bump up. Genetics has dropped off a lot. I think what we're seeing in particular with genetics, in 2007, a lot of the work was actually people developing the technique to do the mark recapture with genetics. Now it's more people using it as a tool within their work. So that's why I think there's less research going on in that category. Administration, there's been a few more projects, particularly on TEK collection and other. At this point, I don't remember what other stood for. So. Looking across the entire country, there are 5 projects that are considered Canada-wide projects where people are not working within one jurisdiction. This includes, by the way, Environment Canada's work on critical habitat identification. Looking at keywords within those projects, you'll see a list of words there that sort of come up within those projects. Institutional involvement, these are the institutions that are involved with national level work. UBC, U of A, University of Laval, University of Montana, Guelph, Northern BC, and University of Alaska. These are all institutions that are involved with these broad scope work. This work at the national levels always involves government and industry collaborating. In British Columbia, I need to point out that the green dots on the map are not precise locations exactly where the work is going on, but they just sort of give you an idea of the spread. For example, the dot you see sort of in the northernmost part of BC actually covers about 7 different ranges up there, so it's very large. And they're not all included on there because if there was, for example, a province-wide project, it didn't get a dot. Otherwise, just put it in the middle of the province, that wouldn't be terribly useful. Again, topics considered, you'll see predation risk is a big one. That's in multiple projects. Interestingly enough, BC is one of the provinces that is looking at alternative silvicultural techniques. It's not so much in the recovery stage, but in the harvesting stage. So that's some interesting stuff there. Herd boundary refinement, I think that's just collecting a lot of, get more specific as where those animals really are using space. Again, institutional involvement, Thompson Rivers, UNBC, UBC, University of Alberta, and University of Victoria. And again, there was actually not only government industry, but there was a number of consultants that were involved with these projects. Alberta, here we are. Relatively few projects going on currently, which is surprising, or at least relatively few projects we were able to identify. Again, I'm not surprised if we missed some. But again, the topics considered tend to be predation, industrial mitigation, some genetics, some location technique work. There's some economic work, which was, I think, probably the only jurisdiction that's doing specific economic work on caribou. Habitat selection, industrial disturbance, and again, Calgary, Alberta, and University of Montana involved. I suspect there's one more university that I missed there. Where'd you go? Mr. Wasser? You're doing Alberta work, right? Yeah, see, okay, I missed one. My fault. And of course, government and industry are involved. Manitoba, for those of you who are geographically astute, I skipped a province. That's because there's currently nothing going on in Saskatchewan, or at least we weren't able to identify anything going on in Saskatchewan. There's one Manitoba-wide project. Again, topics considered. You will see a lot of disturbance, some forced succession stuff. Not much predation work in Manitoba, which was a bit surprising. And the institutions involved, Manitoba and Trent. Ontario, only 5 projects going on. I connected 3 of those dots with a line. That's because that's a fairly large study that's involving 3 different study areas. And there's some going on in the extreme north, up around the Victor Mine and places like that. Again, you'll see silviculture is brought in here again. That's alternative silvicultural techniques. Numerous institutions involved, government and industry. Quebec is a big mishmash of projects. We identified 24 projects. I wouldn't be surprised if there was even more. A number of them are province-wide, so this is the government collaborating with 1 or 2 researchers looking at data from across the province, trying to get a handle on things going on there. I put very few dots on this map because I found that 1 dot would suffice because you take 1 herd in Quebec and there's 7 or 6 projects all going on in that 1 herd. They're all identified as separate projects. So don't count the dots and figure why it doesn't equal 24. Again, topics considered. Predation is big in Quebec, in particular around black bears, so sort of alternative predators, industrial disturbance, calf predation, and so on and so forth. Institutional involvement, sort of the usual suspects across the entire province, and government and industry heavily involved. Finally, Newfoundland and Labrador, a lot of projects going on, a lot of things happening in Newfoundland and Labrador, 13 projects, 2 that are Newfoundland-wide. There's your topics, genetics, forest management, calving, habitat, and so on and so forth. Only memorial involved in Newfoundland, apparently, and government involved. There's no industry involvement in memorial in Newfoundland on caribou at the moment. I guess I can't leave out our northern neighbors, Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. There's only 2 woodland caribou projects going on in the Northwest Territories. These are woodland caribou. There's also always barren ground projects. We identified 11 barren ground projects that are documented in the report, but I'm not talking about them today. Topics considered: TEK, demographics, movement patterns, and industrial disturbance. University of Alberta is primarily the only institution that's really involved with those projects, and government, of course. So, after all that, what do we know and what don't we know? A lot of work has been done currently on describing caribou ranges and local population persistence. We know from not only EC's work, but from other folks, lower disturbance levels is good. Fewer linear features is good, preferably with less activity on those linear features, and lower levels of predators and or alternate prey, or I guess both. Proposed or in some cases implemented solutions right across the country include large mosaics, set-asides, triage system, higher hunting quotas, predator control, and protected areas. It's also important to note, and others have pointed this out, that accurate population details are lacking to severely lacking in some places. And it's really difficult to understand the effects we're having on caribou if we don't know how many caribou there are in some places. Something we need to work on probably. However, based on the work we're seeing going on, answers remain fairly elusive to a number of key uncertainties, including exactly what is needed to recover already disturbed habitat. We've talked a lot about habitat restoration, habitat restoration, habitat restoration. What does that mean on the ground? Are we just trying to grow old forest, or is there something more specific that we should be doing? And again, where disturbance is likely to continue, do we know enough about mitigating tools? I think we would probably argue that we don't know enough about mitigation at this point. So what are we doing with respect to recovery? There are a couple of projects, as I mentioned, that are doing some alternative silvicultural systems work, particularly in BC and a little bit in Ontario. And there are early steps towards documenting food choices in summer. In Ontario in particular, they're using radio telemetry collars with cameras on them that focus on the head of the caribou to figure out what the caribou is actually eating outside of the winter season. But I think this is an important question, this is an important gap to be filled, because we have a lot of areas that look like this. You can see caribou moving through the forest chunk on the bottom, but there's a lot of expanse up there that is, we would have to say, not currently good caribou habitat, and you have to really think hard about what we need to do to recover those habitats. Currently, there is no published documented source of caribou reoccupying habitat that's been harvested, and I think we really need to start thinking about that. I was also asked, as part of my invite to do this, to give sort of a brief overview on the work that NCASI is doing. We've been working on a woodland caribou nutrition research program for about 2.5 years, and having lots of fun with that. You can see our PIs, John Cook from NCASI, who's done extensive work with elk, Kathy Parker, who I'm sure many of you know, Perry Barbosa at UAF, Rachel Cook, who's another one of our researchers, and myself. This research program is really to try and put another tool in the hands of folks doing caribou conservation. Think about the caribou conservation cards we've been dealt. Land use planning is obviously the number one. Everyone's doing it, everyone's trying to figure out the best way to do it. Best management practices, we've talked about those a lot, very important. Whether they're effective or not, that's a good question, but it's something that we have to keep working on. Intense species management is something that has been tried in a number of places. We're talking predator control, alternate ungulate management, maternal penning, or captive breeding. But what we're trying to do is add one more card to habitat or range enhancement. What can we do silviculturally to improve that landscape for caribou? So this is using active habitat management and minimizing harvesting footprints. The nice thing about this is that it not only is an extra tool, but that particular tool can benefit the other 3 tools that are out there. So if we can create better caribou habitat, if we can restore caribou habitat more effectively, then it increases the odds of success of the other tools. This work is based on a 20-year extensive research program that we've done in elk in the Pacific Northwest. This data you're seeing here is on elk. We don't have this data yet on caribou, but we do have some indications, some early indications from some work in Ontario that while it's hard to say exactly what the limitations are in nutrition, at this point it looks like for most herds 25 to say 40% of the animals within each herd are actually doing marginally from a nutrition standpoint. They're not doing terribly well within each population. So this is something that we're trying to work on and come to grips with. The purpose of this program is simply to document the extent and severity of nutritional inadequacy, if there is any. We recognize that there's a number of places that probably it's not a problem, and that even if it is a problem, that problem might pale in comparison to the other things in the landscape, like wolves, for example. We want to identify patterns of nutritional influences across space and time, and finally to provide another tool in the toolbox to forest managers who are actually trying to manage the landscape, recover habitat, and increase the probability of persistence on the landscape of woodland caribou. The research program is a 3-phase program. The first phase, which we are pretty much wrapped up now, this is collecting baseline nutritional data. This is taking place at the Large Animal Research Station in Fairbanks, Alaska, where we currently have our research herd that we've developed. Some folks in this room have actually been there and seen it, so we've got that well underway. Phase 2 is what we are currently planning. This is the caribou grazing trials, where you actually take these tame caribou and walk around the woods with them and see what they eat, and then take measurements on them to see how it affects their physiology. So in the end, the hope is that in the third phase of the project, where we develop the caribou management applications, we can develop nutritional maps, for example, on a landscape. So we can know exactly where the really good habitats are for them from a nutritional standpoint. Again, this particular map is built with elk in mind. So we've been very successful at this project in the US. We are hoping to do the similar work here in Canada on caribou. This work in the US is currently being used to rewrite some of the forest practices guides in Oregon and Washington. So this has been a really interesting project, and like I say, we're well underway at this point. Current status of this particular project, we have a research herd developed and stable at UAF. Phase 1 of the work is roughly 2/3 complete. Phase 2 of the work of the grazing trials is currently being planned. We've been working a lot on site selection. John Cook and I have visited a number of locations in BC as to where we might land this project, and working with our partners in the province of BC. We're hoping to start doing some basic vegetation work in 2012, and the foraging trials are planned to begin in 2013. We are still seeking suitable areas and interested researchers in other parts of Canada, so outside of BC.